All right, y'all, we are back for another episode. I sound like a man, but that's okay because my vocals are acting really crazy today. But we get through this. So, last time we were together, y'all, we talked about a lot of things that we have seen unfold. But one of the things that we highlighted that we said we wanted to come back and revisit was talking about homophobia and transphobia in the Black community. So that's what we're going to tackle today. But before we jump into that topic, I always like to start with this. Just kind of want to check in with y'all. How are you doing? How are things going? We seem to be getting close to getting more people vaccinated and with COVID and possibly trying to get back to some sense of normalcy. I don't know if it'll ever go back to what it was, but maybe inching in that way. So just kind of want to check in with you. So, Rebecca, start with you. How are you doing? How's everything going?
So everything is going pretty good. I have gotten my vaccination. I got my vaccination this morning, round one, Moderna. So that went well. My family's all getting theirs today, so that's going well. And I am looking into going back to school, and things are tougher than expected, but I am keeping my eyes on the prize and not giving up and just finding different ways to do it. So things are going well. Things are going well.
Yeah. Kalia, Dr. J, how are y'all doing? How are things going with you?
I'm actually doing pretty well. I know last time we talked, I was kind of like really trying to just survive. But you can see I did my hair, which means that I have some energy. So that's good.
Yes. You look fabulous, by the way.
Thank you. But yeah, I've been doing pretty well. It definitely helps for me personally that it's been a lot warmer and sunnier over here and on the East Coast. That always helps being able to get outside and walk around, get some vitamin D. But yeah, I've been doing okay. So things are feeling better than they were. I hope it stays that way.
Me too. Kalia, how you doing?
So I am happy about spring. Like once I can get outside, it just does worlds of good. Right now, however, I am preparing to have our first group of students enter the building. And so we're running a small pilot that's kicking off next week. And just as you can imagine, all of the logistics, all of the safety protocols, making sure families are prepped is just been a lot. And so excited to see the babies. We have missed them and just be able to have them in the building. But I'm equally just anxious and making sure everybody in the building is going to be safe. Yes. And frustrated that I can't seem to get a vaccine appointment.
Hopefully, like in Georgia, by next week, we should start seeing more traction with like massive vaccination sites opening. That's supposed to be the plan. So I'm hoping that that actually happens and you'll be able to get an appointment and just drive up and get a vaccine, hopefully.
APS is going to allow all of their educators to get vaccinated. So an email should be coming out any day now. If I can't get it through a private provider, they are going to host a day, but I'd like to get it sooner than later.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. So I think for me, I honestly don't know how I am. I have different emotions on different days. Most days are good because I just have a lot going on. But I think health wise, I've been dealing with some things for a while now that I think are catching up with me. And so I'm just trying to, wrestle with that and battle with that. And I'm that type of person, like, I don't just tell people in my life, like, oh, these are the things that are going on with me health wise. Like, I just push through and just do what I need to do. But now I'm like, I think I need a village. It's like, I think I need a village right now. So, but things are good in a lot of ways. Professionally, things are going really well. I have other things on my plate. So right now, I think for me, it's prioritizing and not balancing because I just feel like balancing is just not really possible. So there are things that are taking different priorities. Gearing up to, go to school for my second master's degree soon. So it's just, trying to get my brain right and my life right and just kind of get everything together. So, and I get vaccinated next week. So I happened to nab an appointment. I was like, thank you. I literally cried yesterday when I got the text back like, hey, we can fit you in at 4. And I was like, I just didn't realize how much tension I was holding around that. And so, yeah, so that's been cool. So, but I'm glad to hear that you guys are well and that things seem to be going. And better weather helps with that. It just does. When it's cold and it's depressing, it really, really is. So, hopefully, as we enter into spring and summer, things are going to be a lot better, like emotion wise. So, all right, well, let's jump right into this topic. So, like I said, last time we were together, we unpacked a lot of things, and one of the things that we talked about was Black Lives Matter, and we talked about what happened around George Floyd, how that kind of just sparked across the nation and literally the world of people being involved with Black Lives Matter. But then we start seeing some divisions within Black Lives Matter, and not from the curators of Black Lives Matter, but people who were participating in it. There became this issue that came to the forefront of that there's still a lot of homophobia and transphobia in the Black community, where we had to start saying all Black lives matter, that we are incorporating every Black person, no matter what their experiences are, no matter what their sexuality is. And that's actually listed on their website of what they believe about family, and they believe in all types of family, not just what people quote unquote consider the nuclear family. And so people who don't necessarily subscribe to that started causing some divisions within that. And in some ways actually started speaking kind of ill of Black Lives Matter because they felt like you should not be supporting an organization that is for trans people, for those who may be queer, for those who are non-binary. And so the thing about Black Lives Matter is they are encompassing for all. So I kind of want to start with this. What were some things that you saw and witnessed as that movement was starting to build, but this division started happening when it came to our Q plus siblings? So you may hear me say Q plus in this conversation, which is just LGBTQIA. I just always say Q plus because that encompasses everybody. What were some things that you saw happening as the movement was growing and getting bigger, that you start seeing within the Black community, this division? Rebecca, I want to toss it to you first. What were some of your thoughts and observations?
I thought it was a lot of power struggles. So we are trying to dismantle white supremacy. We are trying to build up our allies so that we can do better, so that they can do better for us, and so that the world can be better for us, especially in America. And it was very disheartening to see that there were people within our community, within our race, that were willing to do the same thing to people in our own race, our own community, that other races and communities do to us. They were willing to put other people down physically, mentally, to raise themselves up, to be in a better position. And it was disheartening because we were all fighting for the group. You have Black trans women, you have Black women who are queer, you have Black people of all walks of life on the front lines, specifically our trans sisters who are in the front with the mics, putting their bodies in the front for everyone. And they're the ones who are being attacked at rallies. They're being murdered in the streets. And it was unfair, and it was like the worst thing that we could have done. It's like the all our ethics went out the window when it came to people in our community. And we have to do better. We absolutely have to do better, but we cannot say that Black Lives Matter. We cannot, apart from the organization, the movement itself, and our own version of civil rights, we cannot do that if we are picking and choosing which Black lives are worth saving or are actually matter. It's all of us. All of us matter. We have to treat all of us the same. And the homophobia really jumped out when it came to the protests and hearing people. I experienced it when I posted something on Instagram about these are all the things that I believe in. These are all the people that I support and believe in. And trans people were on that list. And a cishet man came into my small Instagram and was very upset that I wasn't talking specifically about police brutality. But when we were out on the streets, we were asking for justice. We were asking for peace. And we can't say, oh, I want peace for cisgendered heterosexual people. That's not fair, and that's not what we were out there for.
Yeah, I agree. Kalia, Dr. J, do y'all have any thoughts? What were some observations that you saw?
I think what I saw and what I just kind of always expected. I think the Black community, and it's not everyone, but the social conservatives of the Black community always seem to rear their head around this issue, and it's rooted in their interpretation of religion. And so I saw that come through strong. And in some ways blaming what was happening on a quote unquote lack of morality, because of their supports of an alternative lifestyle. I hate that term. And it happens like routinely, but every time I see it, it is frustrating. And I say that as somebody who identifies as an ally, as well as the sister of a gay Black man. And every time it happens, I worry, just because people can be so hateful. In the videos I think we saw come up of a person being attacked in I think it was a grocery store, just for simply being, just for simply existing in a way that people don't agree with. And I say person because I can't remember how they identified, but it was awful to see. And when I see those things, it makes me think of my brother. And I always text him like, be safe, just be safe, because that's really, I hate that I have to. It's like what we tell women when they're out, like be safe, and we shouldn't have to, but it's just the reality. So yeah, those are really my observations, and it's frustrating because we're not there yet.
Yeah. Dr. J, what are your thoughts?
I'd say my observation was that I didn't really see a lot. And I think that's telling. I didn't see a lot on like social media that really specifically focused on LGBTQ plus Black people and, their health and their safety and their wellness. I didn't see a lot of activism around that. Not that there wasn't any, but then I also see a lot of that activism coming from the LGBTQ plus community, and from Black women. And not so much from what this movement has tended to center on, which is Black men. I think that there are benefits and there are drawbacks to the fact that these movements in the past several years have sprung up around police brutality, because I think that because police brutality is something that primarily affects men, although women are also suffer at the hands of police, as well as LGBTQ plus people. And so I think that it's wonderful that this movement is happening and it's been brought to the forefront because of police brutality. But part of the problem is that because that's something that happens so much to men, then we sort of lose sight of all the other Black people who are also facing oppression on a daily basis. And so that's been a problem, I think, in the movement from its modern beginnings, like in 2012 after Trayvon Martin was murdered. And I think, unfortunately, just like Black people have had to bring this movement to the forefront, it may end up, it's probably going to be LGBTQ plus people who have to bring that movement to the forefront of this intersectional movement of looking at people have so many different identities, and so Black people have all different kinds of identities. We're not just Black, and we have to start to be able to recognize that more in these movements. So I think for me, what I really noticed was like an absence of focus on LGBTQ plus Black people. I didn't see as much of the sort of bullying and negativity, although I know that that's out there. But when in the things that I was looking at, I was mostly just not really seeing anything, and not really seeing anything about Black women either, to be honest. I mean, there's a lot of groups that sort of are kind of left behind right now.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's interesting because, you know, Black Lives Matter was curated by queer women. So it's really interesting to me that oftentimes, which, and again, they've been very vocal and it's listed out on the website. And when they speak, they talk about all the different forms of community within the Black community that they are for. I always think it's interesting though, how our queer fam and our trans fam and our non-binary fam, they're kind of always left out of the conversation as the movement grows into these different spaces. And I did see some of the viciousness towards our trans sisters, especially Black trans sisters, at these marches, because they're coming in their full self, right? Like they're not about to back down from anybody. We're saying Black Lives Matter. They're a part of that. And just the way in which they were treated, you know, by cisgendered, you know, heterosexual, straight Black men. Like that's primarily who was attacking them. And so there has to be this weird dichotomy that your Blackness is accepted, but you being trans isn't, or you being queer isn't, or you being non-binary isn't, or even at this point, you being a woman, right? Like, it's like everything, your Blackness, it's like we put things in boxes, and I'm like, no, we can't do that, because this is the totality of who I am. Like, and so either all of me is accepted or none of me is accepted. So I did see that. And I think Kalia, I think the person that got beat up in the, I think it was a convenience store or something like that. Or I think it was a convenience store or grocery store. I think that was a trans woman, if I'm not mistaken, that these guys started trying to beat up on her. And so just watching that, it was incredibly frustrating, which actually I'm about to lead into the next question, because the biggest people that I saw giving pushback were religious folks, of why they will not join in with Black Lives Matter, though they believe that Black Lives Matter, or a certain fraction of Black Lives Matter, but they were like, no, but we can't agree with that. So I want to ask y'all, how do you think, I want to say Christianity because a big percentage of Black people identify as Christian, not all though, but a big percentage of it. So I want to ask, how do you feel like the church, the Black church / religion, has played a part into the homophobia and transphobia that we see in the Black community? And I don't know if y'all want me to go first or one of y'all wants to go first. You can kind of let me know.
I can jump in. I think it goes to an interpretation of scriptures within the Bible that often are taken out of context, or not taken in context of the social environment of the time. And so they hold on and have a very literal interpretation, and which is interesting because when they do that, they ignore all of the other things that they dismiss, like wearing pants, and all of the other fun things that are in the Bible. And I think it's frustrating, but I always like laugh, because I'm like, okay, so about that thing about premarital sex, like it's picking and choosing what you want to condemn people for, but it always goes back to, I'm going to take this scripture, I'm going to take it out of context, I'm going to cling to it for dear life to beat people over the head with it.
Yeah, I agree. So I'm about to go in for just a few seconds because this is the space that I have come out of. So I always tell people I'm going to speak from a Black church experience. So I can't speak to other religions because I have not been a part of those spaces. Um, from a Black church experience, I always tell people when you are a person on the margins, being a part of a Black church is a complicated relationship. So, is what I was saying a few minutes ago. On one hand, it is a space where your Blackness is affirmed, it is encouraged, it is uplifted. It is, it's a place literally where you can exhale because you've been holding in tensions from the world, all week. And then you go in there on Sunday morning and it's like you're around people that look like you, the culture is there, and you feel completely a part of it, right? So on one end, your Blackness is accepted. But on the other hand, as a marginalized person, so whether you are a woman, whether you are a queer person, whether you're trans, whether you're non-binary, that's where it gets complicated because typically that part of you is not accepted, is not embraced. And for me, just in being in that space, and I've been on the receiving end just as a woman, in that space of feeling this weird tension. And I've also have, my queer friends who are in that space and they also feel that tension. It has to feel really shitty that all of you can never be accepted in this space. That on one hand, your Blackness is affirmed, but this part of you is condemned. And so it becomes, I think, for them really hard to kind of be in that space, because there is this teaching of that you are an abomination, that you are less than, that you because here's a good example. I was talking to somebody in a church space. It was a straight Black man. We were having a conversation, and I made the comment that Billy Porter, who I adore because I think he's just fierce, right? When he hits a red carpet, it's everything. He's gonna shut it down, right? And I think he had just worn, it was like that tuxedo outfit that had that beautiful black, that looked like a gown at the bottom. And me and my friend, we were talking about how he killed that look. And the person that was in the room with us, who was a straight Black man, kind of looked disgusted. He was like, I don't understand you Black women. And I was like, what do you mean? He was like, shouldn't you be angry about that? And I was like, for what? Like, he killed it. Why would I be angry about that? Well, I mean, that's the reason why y'all keep saying that you got a small pool of eligible, good Black men. Like, you should be upset because people like that take away. And I was like,
well, I just want to jump in here and say this because that angers me. You ain't one of the Black men right there. Because from what you are interrupted these women's conversations to say something so hateful and bigoted, you ain't one of them Black men that we looking for. So just want to jump in and say that real quick.
yeah. So first of all, has somebody ever said something to you where you just have to process you're trying to process the logic behind it, and you're like, what the hell? It's like, and so I said, first of all, I will never demean any person that is being fully who they are and fully who they were created to be. I will always celebrate that. I said, so number one, I celebrate him. Number two, I said, so you want him to act like he's not a proud gay Black man to appease who? And he was like, well, I just think that that's a part of the problem. Like, gay Black men are taking away possible candidates for y'all. I was like, stop. So now you're going back to this illusion of that somebody's sexuality really is a choice. I said, did you choose to be a straight person, a hetero? So why are you now applying that to a gay person? Like, that doesn't make any sense to me.
But I think also, even if it is a choice, people should be able to have the freedom to choose what they want to do with their life, and nobody else really has the right to judge that.
Exactly.
And in my estimation, from kind of a more like psychological perspective, I think a lot of it does go back to sort of the way people are interpreting scripture. But I also think that, I want to kind of take a step back and also talk about, as a group of oppressed people, I think that there's a way that oppression sort of goes down the pipeline, right? So like one group is oppressed and then they oppress the next weakest group below them, and then they oppress others, you know? And so the fact that we're not talking about all of this as oppression, it's all oppression, whether it's about your race, your sex, your gender identity, your sexuality, whatever. We're not talking about that as a you know, as a combination, like that oppression really affects people and all their identities. And we can't really single out one form of oppression and somehow, you know, what Audre Lorde said was like, I'm a Black lesbian woman, mother, you know, all of those things are me. I can't separate those things from one another. So how can we separate those things in our movement for liberation? It actually makes absolutely no sense. And I think that's why people get so much on the defensive, because there's that like cognitive dissonance, like that confusion around like, oh wait, I'm fighting for my own freedom and liberation, but I'm still oppressing this other group of people. Like that doesn't compute. And so it leads to people almost doubling down on these like oppressive viewpoints and attitudes. But I want to put it within that broader context because I think that's really important. And I think people also get worried about their loved ones, you know, being gay or something like that because, you know, we already have a marginalized identity, which is being Black. And so then, okay, now you're adding another marginalized identity. Now you have another one. It's similar with mental illness. I find that, you know, people don't want their loved ones to have all these different marginalized identities. And so I think some of it comes from that as well, this fear. But it sort of, it comes out in ways that are not actually nurturing and helpful. They're actually harmful.
And I will say, so for me, I was raised by a West Indian man who was also a pastor. And the way in which religion can be used to get you to fall in line was something in my household that just, if it couldn't appeal to you have an internal sense to do something, it was use hell as a motivator, and the fact that you're going to go to hell. And I think for me, when I coming up, there was this, and I hate to say it, but until I got to college, I agreed 99% with the policies of George Bush. And I know this because we had to take a survey in high school around that election. And all of the ugliness that invokes, those are the thoughts and beliefs that I had until I got to college. And it took a lot for me to unlearn it. And I will say I'm grateful that I unlearned it in time to support my brother who came out. But like Dr. J said, the fear of holding on to, but this is going to happen and this is how people are going to look at you, that got used. And then when that didn't work, hell was
Hell
used.
is always the golden ticket.
Yes. And there was this, my little sister had passed. So my brother, unfortunately, was told, if you ever want to see your sister again in heaven, you can't be like this. And it was ugly. It was disgusting. But that's the reality of like, I'm going to cling to this. I'm scared for you. And it comes out in really ugly ways. And we've got to do better.
Yeah. Honestly, I feel like to me, that's kind of where the patriarchy comes into play, because you have straight Black men that are kind of, you know, what we were talking about, Rebecca, with the previous episode, is that they kind of are the white people of Black people. Like they have this power. And so they get to dictate, you know, what gets said, what gets done, and how something should look. Here's an example. One of the things that bothers me a lot is it's not just straight Black men to me that are incredibly homophobic and transphobic. A lot of straight Black women are. And especially when they are in that religious context of church. The reason why I say that is because oftentimes how things are communicated theology-wise are centered around this conversation, is that queer men are the enemy of Black women, because it's why many of us are single. And so many Black women have taken that and have this attack towards queer Black men because they think that they're the reason why I'm still single, I'm not married, why I can't date. And so you see a lot of homophobia from straight Black women who are coming out of those spaces that have that type of theology, which is incredibly dangerous. First of all, it's ignorant. Let's just start there, but is dangerous too, because it perpetuates this idea that somehow queer men are being immoral or dishonest. They're leading straight Black men astray because now they're sleeping. Like, none of it makes sense. Like, the logics don't make sense. So I think we kind of have to also look at how patriarchy is set up and how that Black men, straight Black men specifically, are able to control this narrative and this form of theology that can and will always leave them in power and leave them gaining all of the benefits of certain things. So if they can create certain narratives, I mean, it's literally what we say about whiteness all the time, you know, in how that's set up. So if you can create a system where you are consistently in control, you're controlling the narrative so you can maintain the power, you can maintain the benefits of said power, then it's going to always be that way. I see that heavily though in these church spaces. It really is, it's so disheartening, and it makes it kind of hard, like we were talking about earlier, where on one end you're cool with Blackness, but then you won't speak out against that Black trans women are being murdered exponentially. That is a Black Lives Matter issue, if there ever was one, that needs to be addressed and needs to be talked about. And I can think of one pastor that I know of that has ever said that Black trans women, their lives matter, and that they really started talking about this issue of how Black trans women are being murdered in just exponential rates. But other than that, it's silent. It's like, it's quiet, because that don't affect us. They don't matter. You know what I'm saying? So that's a big issue with straight Black women being incredibly homophobic, but it's coming from those theological church spaces that are taking theology and misconstruing it. Rebecca,
I mean,
oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say real quick, like, it just doesn't even make sense because, like, how are we going to, I don't know. It baffles my mind. I just don't understand how we're going to be liberated as Black people if we can't all come together. It's just so frustrating. It's so frustrating.
Yeah.
So I just want to join the conversation by saying I'm in the queer community. And when I first came out, I guess, whatever that means, I was faced with a lot of my friends who happened to be Christian who we were young, and so it was like an attack. Like, I remember being verbally attacked or like mentally attacked. And I had a friend who, condemned me to hell. And I asked her about it recently. It happened about 10 years ago, but I asked her about it. And we were talking about sexuality, and I was like, you told me I was going to hell. Do you recall? You told me that I was going straight to hell, which it doesn't work because I am who I am. And I think I find that to be a problem when we talk about Christianity, when we talk about other groups. There's such a disdain for people knowing who they are, living who they are, and expressing who they are publicly. Now, some people know who they are, but don't express it publicly, and that's okay. But there are people who live their truth publicly or quietly or calmly, but they are who they are. And I see a lot of problems with maybe it is Christians that you are taught to go by these set of rules. And if you stray from these set of rules, you are a problem, something is wrong. And when you see someone who is doing what they want to do, living their best life, their true life, you find an issue with it and you try to attack it and dismantle it. I don't think that's right, and I don't think it works. When Kalia mentioned earlier about condemning people to hell or that it happens, it doesn't work. As in, like, you telling me that I'm going to hell is not going to make me not like who I like or be who I am. It's just what you are trying to put onto me. And I'm not a parent, so I can't say about the thought of trying to protect someone. But if you are already Black, there's not much. That's considered the worst thing you can be in America. They're already on the down slope. So them being something else added onto it, it may make it worse, but it doesn't make it, being straight doesn't actually make it much better. So it's just disgusting, especially when it comes from Christians. And I feel like I'm going to go on a rant because the Bible talks about love and we're supposed to love each other and we're supposed to do things. And as Kalia said, we're picking and choosing what we are going to live by and condemn people by, but we don't do that for anything else but for this group of people. And it's not fair. And like Kalia said earlier, it's about what you translated or what you took from it without let's jump into white supremacy without looking into the translation of the Bible that you're reading and what that means, and even knowing how the Bible was used against us as a community in our past. And so then to take it and make another group within ourselves worse, it's your ethics are very muddy, very, very muddy.
Right. That's why, I mean, when you think about homophobia and transphobia, like among white people, it's like, okay, that makes sense, you know, racism, transphobia, misogyny, whatever. But then when you think about it in the Black community, it's like, but wait, like, we have to be better than that. You know, it's kind of, we're just sort of replicating what's been happening to us. So.
And I think that goes to this, to me, it's around this notion of respectability will save us. So if we can prove that we are the best according to the acceptable white standard, essentially, then maybe they'll see the humanity in us. But that doesn't work. And so it's infuriating that we still push this, even in our sacred institutions, not only at the church, but in HBCUs. And while they do such a service for us, they also cause real harm by having people internalize just harmful notions of what it means to be a good Black person and what that standard is.
Because if I see one more group of Black men taking pictures in suits and talking about, oh, well, this makes them respect you more. No, it doesn't. They assassinated Dr. King in a suit. So what you talking about? Like,
well,
you know,
that's what I'm saying. We've known since the 60s that doesn't make a difference. I don't even know why we're still on that. It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. I think for me though, I want as heterosexual people for us to show up for our queer fam and for our trans fam and our non-binary fam the way they show up for us. There has never been a time in this movement that they are not out there, feet to pavement, like being very vocal. And it's like, when do we show up? When do we reciprocate that? When do we speak up for them? When do we cover them? When do we protect them? I remember a few years ago, there were a few students, I think it was 3 guys at Morehouse. They had gotten kidnapped and like thrown in a trunk. And the Black community was outraged. And it was like, what? And then when it came out that they were 3 gay Black men, the whole narrative changed. Well, I mean, what did they do? I mean, so all of the same people who were just a couple of weeks ago saying, oh my God, this is terrible. See, this is what we're talking about. Y'all don't value Black lives. And the moment that they found out that they were queer Black men, it shifted. And it's like, what changed? Like, wrong is wrong. So what does their sexuality have to do with anything? These men were kidnapped, like in broad daylight and put in a trunk. You know what I'm saying? So we have to deal with that internally. So moving to the next question, how do we become better allies? How do we kind of help in a way as heterosexual people to really be good allies in the community and to really educate people who are like us, who think that it's not their issue because they don't have to deal with that? You know, what do we do? How do we tackle that?
Well, I'll tell you from my perspective as a lesbian that I think a lot of it centers around amplifying the voices of queer people, of queer Black people. And, you know, those of us who do have a following on social media, or who are influential, or, you know, like we're doing on this platform, like bringing, amplifying those voices. And I think the other thing is, I think we can do it in our personal lives too, right? And really understanding that, like, messages don't have to be overt. It's, again, this like overt versus covert stuff, right? So, like, you know, I came out as lesbian to my family, and some of the messages, you know, my family accepts me, but some of the messages I get is, you know, like, keep it on the DL, you know, don't talk about it on a podcast that anybody can listen to, but I'm going to anyway. You know, like, those kinds of messages that aren't necessarily saying like you're going to go to hell or this is wrong, but sort of giving the message of like, hey, you know, keep yourself a little bit under wraps. And as somebody who's worked in predominantly white institutions my whole career, that's exactly how I feel about my Blackness in those settings, right? And so, you know, it's, again, just the same old shit. Oh, okay, am I allowed to curse? It's just the same old shit, different day. You know, it's like, it's just, and one thing I wanted to say too, what Marielle mentioned about, you know, this narrative that queer Black men are like taking men out of the dating pool for Black women. Number one, there's also queer Black women, so maybe it evens out. Number two, it also shows a lack of understanding the historical context of the family structure of Black Americans, because the family structure of Black Americans is the way that it is, and is somewhat different from white Americans because of the history of oppression and slavery that we've experienced throughout time. And why do we need our family structure to be the same as the family structure of white people? Why? You know, so I think that there's a lot of that there's a lot of sort of the dynamics in history that's maybe not fully understood. I think there's just phobia in general, you know, and nobody's gonna, no matter what you say, nobody's gonna change their mind. But I do think that there's a way that there's a misunderstanding about family structures among Black Americans and why they are the way they are. And there's not a lot of questioning of, well, is this bad anyway?
When I think about my journey to go from somebody who was a bigot, I own it, and as uncomfortable as it is, it's the truth, to where I am today, I really had to do the work in my personal life of just recognizing people as people. So when I got to Agnes Scott, I came into a relationship with a lot of people who were from a lot of different walks of life, who educated me and opened my eyes. I hate that our Q plus peers had to do so much work to educate me. And so I think to the point, like me now taking what I know and using that and sharing it with the other hetero people in my life, especially the bigoted Christian heteros in my life, is one part. I think the other big piece is just really doing the reflection and the journey, like the logical journey of taking what is taught in a space. And I really had to come to terms with my religion and my faith and separate those two, because religion is perpetuated by man. And there are lots of things in religion that just don't make sense. They're tradition, but it's separate from my relationship. And so me just doing that work of starting to question, does this make sense? How can doing harm to someone, and very real visible harm to someone, get me in a closer loving relationship? And then I think the other piece is just looking out for the people in our lives and really being an advocate for them, so that when those conversations do happen, and I'm tested on this every time I go home for our holidays, when those conversations do happen and those family members do start in on the Q plus family and friends in our lives, not being a silent person in the room, but shutting the conversation down and not waiting for the person who is on the receiving end of these hateful remarks to get upset or to leave the room or have to advocate for themselves. Be the first one to speak up against it.
I will say that for our allies, seek out the information. And when the information is being told to you, listen. We always talk about listen to understand, do not listen for a response. So when someone is telling you how they have been oppressed, how they have been hurt, the things that they go through, listen to them and accept them as true because it is. And I will say this, other members when we talk about our trans brothers and sisters specifically, I just want to say that the other folks in the community, we are not off of the hook, because when it comes to their safety, their protection, it is on us to do the work to protect them publicly. Because being cis, you already get a pass because you appear what you present. Like, if that makes sense, you are presenting in a way that goes along with what people perceive you as. I guess that makes sense. Hopefully y'all understand what I'm saying. Some people don't have that ability. So we have to fill the room and fill the space so that we can speak to protect them. Because we cannot always expect that they are going to be able to protect themselves, especially not when they are being attacked. We are not off the hook. And just because we are queer doesn't mean we don't have somebody else to protect. And that doesn't mean that we also don't have a voice to speak on. Yeah, especially if we're in like heteronormative spaces. It's kind of like when you're fair skinned and you can pass and white people can't tell, and they start speaking in a way that as if no black people are around, and you have to speak up and make sure that everyone in the room knows. I don't have this benefit, but everyone in the room knows that you're a bigot, and I'm going to let everybody know, or I'm going to address you on it. We have to do the same thing. Just because there are no queer Q plus people in the room doesn't mean that you get a pass to be a bigot. And I have a question that I wanted to ask when it came to activism in the streets and all of that. And maybe this is a question we don't use, but where was the church when it came to the protests, when it came to civil unrest? Because in my memory, when we think about the civil rights movement, the church was the home. The church was where we met, organized, and then moved out. What happened in between then and now that I don't see the church being the home of that?
That is a good question. It is a question that I have actually thought about a lot. Part of it, and specifically with Black Lives Matter, again, what I've heard consistently across, Black pulpits is they don't agree with a lot of the tenets that Black Lives Matter stands for. So they don't want to lend their voice to that. And you have to understand, even in a lot of Black church spaces, it goes back to what I was saying. It is incredibly, patriarchy runs that space. So if it does not affect straight Black men, typically it's not going to be something that is exalted. Even with women's issues, they will ignore them, or they won't be vocal about them. And so I think that's what you are seeing, and why there is an absence is because for some reason, and it's really interesting to me, because a lot of times, if Black church spaces would create this space that all are welcomed, even though they say all are welcome, they really don't mean that. But when all are truly welcomed, then it will allow for a lot of Black clergy to just be who they are, because a lot of them are queer, but they have to hide who they are to fit into this system, right? And so the same people who are up there condemning it are the exact same people who are in queer relationships. It's just in private, but they can't be who they are because of how the structure has been set. So you will see this. It's always this weird, it's just a weird dichotomy. It really is. So you will see them be quiet and they will be silent because they feel like if we support this, if we say this, then that means we're supporting this lifestyle. right? So if we say that trans women, Black trans women being murdered is wrong and we need to fight for it, and we lend our resources behind it, we lend our voice behind it, we, our presence is known, then it's like, oh, well, we're confirming that. And I want to say this, there are churches that are affirming. So I really want to put that out there too. Not as many Black churches as I would like. They're more kind of mixed congregations, but there are churches that are incredibly affirming to our Q plus fam. So I want to be clear in that. But yeah, that's why it's because the way that system is set up, even clergy who are queer can't be who they are. Like that has to be hidden. Dr. J, did you want to say something?
Go. Well, yeah, I was just going to say, I think also, even if the Black church attempted to be a hub or a home, I think there'd be a lot of challenges there, because I think a lot of people have been traumatized by the church and have left the Black church. And I don't know how, I think a lot of people who are out in the streets, who are doing very active, wonderful activism, a lot of them are queer. And so I think that there would also be that big tension if the church did come in and say, hey, we're going to, lead this on. There's a lot of people who are not going to want to, connect with that, because it's a traumatizing place for them.
Absolutely. And two, because now it means that the Black church has to share space. They won't be the dominant voices in this. Like, if we're going to share in this space of fighting for this, we all have a seat at the table. Like, that's just not something that you get to dominate. So no. And like you're saying, a lot of spaces have been incredibly traumatic. I know for me as a Black woman coming up in those spaces, it has been very traumatic for me, stuff that I'm still processing and getting over. So I can only imagine what it's been like for my Q plus fam and my siblings, because there's so much toxicity that resides there theologically. And again, that comes from patriarchy and power from straight Black men, that is damaging. And so I would love to see the Black church so there has been this call for the Black church to be demolished, but I think that it doesn't stop there. I don't think that the Black church just needs to be demolished. I think that it needs to be reimagined, right? So that there is a more inclusive place. I am very proud when I see churches, especially Black ones. There's not a lot of them, let me just say that. But when I see Black churches that have such a beautiful array of people that are in their clergy and their leadership, that are queer, that are, single moms, that are just in so many different areas, because what it presents is that all of us are welcome, all of us are worthy, and God loves every person the same, no matter where we are in this life. So, and God created us all. So who we are is exactly who we're supposed to be. I love seeing that, because it provides more power to the communities that you're serving. So that's just my personal opinion.
I also think it goes back to the church's embrace of respectability. So even way back in the beginning of the civil rights movement, or the second wave rather, when you're talking about like the March on Washington, and the organizer of the March on Washington being erased for most Black history, and not being embraced because he was a gay Black man. Bayard Rustin organized that, but he had to be kept in the shadows because it wasn't respectable enough. And when we think about, who they chose to sit in the front of the bus, they were volunteers, but you're not respectable enough. And so when you think about this movement and what we are rallying for, there are members of the Black church who feel like, well, stuff happens to these people because they brought it on themselves. Why are we marching in the streets for people like this? And so for the church to really be a voice, it has to check some of the nonsense that we have internalized about what a deserving Black person is and who we want to cover and how we want to cover them. Because a lot of times we're like, oh, well, they're criminals. We're not going to dig into why they're criminals and how they came to be criminals or the injustice that got them there. But I can't be in the streets marching for criminals and drug dealers as a member of the church.
And I think
even though I may use drugs.
And I think that even happens beyond the church. And I think that it happens partly because there's this certain, I feel like there's kind of a divide of there's this desire to assimilate into the dominant society, right? And so that's where respectability comes in, I think, where it's like, well, we have to fit into this society. This is how we do it. And on the other hand, there's this more this sense of like, well, let's let everybody be who they are. And we don't have to be like the dominant culture. We can have our own culture, but still be treated equally and be respected. And so I think some of it comes from that sense of wanting to assimilate. Like, that's how we can be safe. And a lot of respectability comes from that viewpoint, I think, which I don't think is helpful.
Right. Yeah. I will go back to when we were talking about allies for a second. I'm like Kalia, so I was raised in this is wrong, you know. And my journey of unlearning a lot of that really came from even in high school and beyond. Like, I would have friends who were queer, and I remember one of my friends came out to me. I was the first person that they ever came out to. And I remember thinking how sacred that was and the bravery that took and everything that I had been taught in a church space. I was like, none of this correlates. Like, church spaces have made, queer people to seem like they are the biggest devils and watch out because you're going to go down a road of just destruction and all of that, when some of the greatest people I knew like were my queer friends. And it just my feelings were like, something isn't adding up here. Like, something doesn't make sense. So I did a lot of listening. I did a lot of hearing about their experiences, because I know what I was being told in those spaces. But no, I want to talk to somebody who experiences every single day. Like, this is what you deal with every single day, and just listening to them. And it really made me realize, like, so what I've been taught has kind of been bullshit, right? Like, it's just like, nah. So now, as much as I was on that other end, now I'm on the whole ally end. Like, I've had so many conversations with people who have said incredibly disparaging things. And I'm like, stop. Let's talk about why that's not okay. And let's talk about why that is incredibly homophobic, what you just said. And I've had to get into some arguments. Like, why are you defending? Like, stop. There's like nobody in this room. I mean, are you? And I'm like, so first of all, so it's always amazing to me how those conversations go. But I just have become very staunch in that. And I will say this too, if you are a person listening and you're still residing in church spaces, I think it's important to find churches that are affirming. Because theology set is completely different and it's so much more freeing. I really want to say that to you. And so I have found a few spaces that are like that. And I find that my relationship with God has actually gotten better because I have been in these spaces that affirm so many people, and I get all of these beautiful perspectives of God and my relationship, and it has grown it exponentially. So I just want to say that. But yeah, coming out of that space, it took a lot of unlearning, right? And it took a lot. And I'm like, check me. If I say something crazy or that's not right, I need you to correct me. And I'm very big on that. Like, I don't ever want to be out in these streets talking crazy and it's harming somebody or it's damaging somebody, simply because that's not my experience every day. So I always want to be held accountable. And so I don't take offense like these people out here. I think this new clip with Sharon Osbourne not taking accountability and becoming a victim. That's one thing I will say. If you're going to be an ally, you need to be able to be open to correction and not get all in your feelings about stuff. Like, because you're going to mess up. It happens. It's going to happen. But hopefully there are people in your life who know the core of your heart, but they can also say, hey, here's why that wasn't cool. And this is why that's harmful. And that you actually listen. So closing up the conversation, what are some lasting thoughts that you guys want to leave with the listeners? And as we keep trying to tackle this subject matter in our community, I don't know who wants to go first.
I'll go first. I want to say, I know that safety is an important consideration when it comes to being out as a gay person. but as many of us Black, queer, trans people as can be out and proud about that, I think that can also help normalize things. And I'm not saying everyone needs to come out. I'm just saying if you have that privilege of being able to, I think it's really important to be very open about that as much as we can be, because keeping it on the DL is kind of like part of the problem. And the other thing I'll say is that, the LGBTQ plus community is not a monolith. There's so many letters because it's all different kinds of people. Gender identity is not the same as sexual orientation. So I think that there's just a lot of education that I think allies can do, like over Twitter or their podcasts, like basic education about like, what do these things mean, and sharing the lived experience of people, queer people, queer Black people, more widely, so that people can start to understand this thing. Like you said, Marielle, when you had friends who were queer, and then you started to see, this doesn't add up. And I think that happens for a lot of people. And I think it's why LGBTQ plus rights have made a lot of progress over the last couple of decades, because people have come out more, and then people are like, oh, well, my family member is gay or trans, and so they're a good person. So, So I think that a lot of it is about visibility as well as education.
Rebecca, Clea, y'all have any lasting thoughts?
I just have a few things that I want to say, and it might come off as harsh. Homophobia and transphobia is bigoted and it's bullshit. Those two things cannot be tolerated towards our journey for equality, equity, and freedom. I would challenge anyone who is falling under those two things to do some internal investigation, do some investigation into the religion you or the ideas that you lean into when you are aggressive or angry towards people who have done nothing to you. As I always try to say, or I always want to think this way, approach everyone with love and every situation with love. And if you are not approaching situations with love, tolerance, and understanding, there's some more work that needs to be done. And there are many resources out there already willing and ready to teach you about the world and about people. Go look for it. It's not hidden, it's available. So yeah.
I think the piece, and Dr. J said this earlier, like we can't be free until we're all free. I think that's an Audre Lorde quote. But that is just so true. And like we've got to stop playing oppression Olympics. We really have to do the work of making sure everyone is free to exist in a world where they can be them and participate in society. So it's one thing to be like, be who you are, but I'm going to do these harmful things that shame you. We have to make room and make space for everyone to be able to fully participate who they are and show up as who they are. And so any movement we participate in, like that has to be a principle or we're not going to get there.
Agreed. I think my lasting thoughts would be to those who are allies. Don't be a down low ally. And what I mean by that is you'll tell queer people one-on-one, I support you, I think it's great. But when it's time for you to actually speak up and to have some boldness about you, whether that's on your social media, whether that is in conversations with your family, whatever that looks like for you, if you're gonna do it, do it. Like you have to be willing to be bold enough to challenge these ideas that are harmful and that are killing people. Like let's be honest. So you can't be silent and just tell queer people, in private conversations, I support you. If you really want to support queer people, use your voice, use your platform, whatever that looks like for you, because I think that that's really important. I knew when I would start saying like Happy Pride Month, like on my IG or whatever, that there were some people who were like, oh, so, and I'm like, I already prepare myself for it. And I'm already like, I got my sword ready, like, let's go, because I'm ready to argue with you. Let's do it. So, but for me, it is really important that I'm incredibly vocal in my support. Second thing is, if you are queer, if you are trans, if you are non-binary, nothing is wrong with you. You are exactly the way you are meant to be. And it is flawless. It is perfect. And we love you. Like, we love you. Like, there are people who we are fighting for you. We are with you. As you all lead the charge, we're following behind you. We will never, I personally, let me say this too, as allies, don't ever become the dominant voice. Your job is to be supportive, not to take over the conversation. So I want to say that. But we are with you. We support you. We love you. And there's nothing y'all can do about that. Like, we got y'all. We got you. So there is a whole generation that I love that is rising. And we're like, that's bullshit. No, it's all of us or none of us. Like, for real, for real. So we're all in this thing together. So that's my lasting thoughts. I don't know. Go ahead.
I have one last thought
Yeah.
for those of us who identify as Christians or ascribe to serving a higher power. You cannot serve a loving God by doing hateful things. Like, it's not going to work.
Yeah.
And so I'll leave you with that.
Or having hateful beliefs. You don't even have to do anything, just the way you think about people. Yeah.
Yeah, and for the love of all that is holy, please stop saying that you love people and hate the sin, because I want to tell you how incredibly damaging that is. You cannot love people without affirming them. And that's what's really important. So cut out all of that rhetoric. Like, that's just not cool. It's not okay. And it's stupid. Yeah. So I think we've had a really good conversation. Thank y'all for, as always, giving your feedback and just sharing what's on your heart, your mind, your spirit. To everybody listening, I hope that you walk away with something that you took, something else to consider. And if you're still in this journey of trying to unlearn toxic beliefs and ideologies and theology, we hope that we can help in just a little bit. So we can. So till next time, y'all, keep alive for more episodes. Bye, everybody.
Bye.